Welcome back, everybody. We're doing a full card breakdown for UFC Fight Night, Lemos versus Andrade. And I actually kind of like this main event. Probably one of the better women's main events in recent memory. Definitely better than the likes of Ladd versus Dumont. Because this one should be a banger. We have two highly ranked strawweights going at it. Two very exciting fighters also. And, potential title implications down the line, for the winner as well. But taking a look at the rest of the card, on paper, it doesn't really seem that strong, but it does look like this potentially could be a card with a lot of finishes. We do have some, pretty exciting fighters on the card as well. We're getting the return of Alexander Romanov. Mudaerji versus Kape should be a very fun one. Jourdain versus Vannata, another, pretty fun fight as well. So, this card not as bad as I think a lot of people are probably going to make it out to, but next week's card is a completely different story. But, for this one, I do think it's not too bad. And then after that, we do have a bit of light at the end of the tunnel here with the pay-per-view in UFC 275. But before I get any further, I do have to recap the previous card. Pretty bad night, honestly, and, pretty disappointing because there were a number of spots that I was pretty confident about. Did cash on a few spots, but the spots I really wanted to hit on obviously did not pan out. But without further ado, let's get right into the recap here. Kicking off the night, we had Aoriqileng Haley versus Kevin Kroom. I was a little skeptical of Kroom's move down, and wasn't confident enough to play the Aoriqileng Haley money line. But yeah, definitely looked like the weight cut had diminished Kroom a little bit. I think it was a fine stoppage as well. The guy face planted. Not much else to say there though. Estela Nunez, Sam Hughes, so, massive letdown spot here. I went pretty hard on Nunez in the spot. And, overall, I do still think she's the better fighter, but, she just fought a terrible game plan in there. Went in there, guns blazing, went all out in that first round. I think she wanted the knockout and pretty much gassed herself out after that first round. She did start round two okay-ish, landed some nice shots, but just wasn't able to keep up. Skill for skill, she is the better fighter, but, I made the mistake of betting on a 6-2 fighter and expecting her to fight a solid, a veteran game plan, I guess. Very reminiscent of Carlos Ulberg versus Kennedy and Zejiku and Maria Agapova and that other chick. Both fighters who I think kind of underestimated their opponent a little bit. Went in really strong early, expecting to just get their opponent out of there, run through them, and, definitely backfired there. But, big learning lesson here, but put me in a massive hole to begin the night there. But moving along, Jordan Levitt, Trey Ogden, so despite my better judgment, I did end up just betting Trey Ogden. I figured, he'd be able to keep it standing long enough to win, a competitive decision. But, yeah, it just ended up being a very, very sloppy fight, honestly. Should have passed on it, but the degenerate in me just couldn't resist. Moving along, Chris Barnett, Martin Buday. Did have some action on Buday and kind of played out the way I expected to. Obviously minus the legal strikes, but, expected Buday to just, hold Barnett in the clinch, kind of just fuck him up there. Maybe look to take him down, but I guess Buday was, content to just grind him against the cage. And, the takeaway here is Buday really not a good fighter, very limited in that regard. Potentially looking to fade him, but the heavyweight division is still extremely thin, and he's definitely going to still be able to pick up some wins. But, against a suitable opponent, he's going to be, I think, a pretty easy fade. Moving along, Rafa Garcia, Jesse Ronson. I did have a couple units on Ronson with the expectation that, he wouldn't be completely diminished, from the weight cut, the layoff, and I guess the PED suspension. But, he did look much slower in there. Didn't really look good whatsoever. But, not a spot I'm too upset about because you just don't know how guys are going to show up, after long layoffs. Sometimes they're okay. Sometimes they look like Ronson. But, these late career moves, down a weight class might not be the best for, I guess older fighters. So definitely something to keep in mind because it seems to be a trend that's not been in their favor lately. But moving along, Drakkar Klose, Brandon Jenkins, did have Klose parlayed up, pretty easy cash there. Jenkins just not really UFC caliber. I did end up hedging a little bit on the Jenkins knockout prop because, it was like plus 1,100 and Klose coming off a long layoff with potential, lingering effects of the concussion or whatever. And that, Jenkins is liable to throw some, spinning attacks, crazy jump knees and stuff. Just wanted to play it a little safe there. Obviously, Jenkins never really even came close. Klose was able to pretty much just dominate. kind of a late stoppage, if I'm being honest. I think it could have been stopped earlier in the fight. Jenkins seemed like he might have just been out on his feet a little earlier, but Herbdean was not having any of it. But moving along, Lena Landsberg, Pannie Kianzad. Not a fight I had really anything invested in. Wasn't sure how Landsberg would look, coming off a long layoff and, childbirth and stuff. She didn't look too bad, all things considered. Definitely gave Pannie a run for her money there, but I thought Pannie won that pretty clearly. Devin Clark, William Knight did have a bit of action on Clark as well. The first round was definitely a little sweaty, but at the end of the day, I think the more skilled fighter won. Clark was able to hit takedowns and eventually get the knockout late in the fight, which probably surprised a lot of people. Clark historically a decisionator, but Knight, not a good fighter, man. The guy's just really strong, really athletic, and he's able to win a lot of fights that way. But I do think that against just more skilled fighters, he's going to struggle. But that strength is no joke, though. I mean, the way he was able to stuff takedowns and just hold Clark in position for most of that first round is just absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, if the guy goes up against just more skilled fighters, he's definitely going to struggle. Moving along, though, Munir Lazez, Angelosa, short notice fight that I didn't really have much of a chance to look too much into. But, it was a pretty fun fight. Lazez looked pretty sharp in there. Losa, not too bad, but, I do feel like he needs a little more polishing up. Pat Sabatini, TJ Laramie. I had Sabatini parlayed up, but obviously the other leg didn't cash. But yeah, Sabatini, was able to win those second and third rounds. Laramie honestly didn't look too bad. Was able to take a round off Sabatini. And, Sabatini is a tough fight for someone making his UFC debut. So not a bad look on Laramie's part. I do think he's got a bit of a future at the UFC level. Might have to cut down because he does seem a bit undersized, but I do feel a step down in competition for him. Even at this weight class wouldn't be too bad for him because I think the not having to cut that much weight probably helps his cardio and durability a little bit. Mayra Bueno Silva, Wuyanan, and I had Silva parlayed up. And I will admit this fight was a little sweatier than I had thought it'd be. Silva, I thought, was giving up a ton of size in that fight. And, after that second round by Wuyanan, where she was able to get some top control time, I thought she'd potentially, look for takedowns come that third round. But all-time bad fight IQ there for Wuyanan. Terrible corner work as well. With the success she was having on top in the wrestling and the grappling, she definitely should have shot in that third round. I think she easily could have won that. Silva was slowing down big time. Wuyanan had, I think a big size and physicality advantage as well. So, man, really lucky, if I'm being honest, that we cashed this leg of the parlay. And Silva, moving forward, especially at 135, is probably a fade for me. I think she's kind of overrated at this point. She's kind of low volume. She's a bit gassy, if I'm being honest, and I do think that she's going to be kind of undersized for this division. So I think against a better 135er, she's going to struggle and potentially looking to fade her moving forward. But Miguel Baeza, Andre Fiallo, no action on this fight. Baeza, he did look sharp early, but like I was saying before, I did feel his chin was a bit of a liability and kind of reared its ugly head here again against a very heavy hitter in Fiallo. Fiallo, I don't know if he's a phenomenal fighter, but the guy is still really tough and he does it really hard. So I do think he could rack up a few more wins. But, I think against maybe more durable fighters that could, push him late, will probably be a better matchup for him or against him. Caio Bahayo versus Omar Gadziev. So this one I ended up hedging out on. Did end up just putting another 1.5 units on Bahayo. I did do a short little write-up on the Bet MMA Tips thing, but essentially I did feel that Omar Gadziev's path to victory was to repeatedly hit takedowns and get top control time, but, I hadn't seen too much footage on Bahayo taken down, and, apparently the guy's, rolling a ton with Maya as well. So, I just felt the path to victory for Bahayo would be a little wider than Omar Gadziev, and, in all of Omar Gadziev's fight, he's been able to hit takedowns and get top control time. And, I did have questions as to how he's going to look if he isn't able to hit takedowns. And I'm kind of glad I did hedge out there. Did also play the over, or not the over, but fight goes to decision. Thought it'd be a more competitive fight, honestly. And I thought both guys would be tough enough to survive to decision. And on top of that, Bahayo is not really a finisher. If he had a little more killer instinct, he probably could have gotten Omar Gadziev out of there. He landed that jump knee on him, but didn't really follow up. I felt that, Omargadzev was pretty much shelling up, but Caio just never really put the pressure on him. I felt that if he, would have swarmed him afterwards, he probably could have gotten the finish, but kind of lucky he didn't. Was able to cash on the fight goes to decision. And lastly, we had Vicente Luque, Bilal Muhammad. Did have action on the Luque side. Not a great bet in hindsight, honestly. Probably, if I were to play the Luque side, would have just taken him to win inside the distance, near evens. Got a little ahead of myself on the money line play, but, really solid performance by Bilal there. Very good footwork. Was able to stay on his bike for all 25 minutes. Very impressive there. Was able to mix in the takedowns as well. And, Luque was just never able to get his timing down. But it does look like guys with good footwork and movement will give Luque a lot of trouble in there. But yeah, bad read and a bad bet from my part. Big learning moment though, but obviously looking to bounce back on this card. So without further ado, let's get right into the breakdowns for UFC Fight Night. Lemos versus Andrade. And in the next fight, we have Dean Barry versus Mike Jackson. And Barry's the minus 900 favorite. Come back on Jackson is plus 550. And, this is a pretty straightforward fight, honestly. Not too much to break down here. First of all, it does look like this was the third time this fight's been booked, so it looks like the UFC really wants this fight. I think they honestly just want to feed Jackson to Barry here. And, with Barry, he is primarily a striker. He fights out of that karate stance, hands down, bladed stance, likes to bounce in and out of the pocket. Does seem to have pretty heavy hands. Kind of hard to tell how good he is since, he's just blowing these lower level guys out of the water, pretty early as well. So some definite red flags there, but I don't think it's going to matter too much in this fight because he's going up against Mike Jackson, who is a terrible fighter to say the least. And I'm not even convinced he's an actual fighter. The guy's got one professional win, and it's over CM Punk, who's not a fighter either. So this, in my opinion, is pretty much a setup fight. This is a can crushing, honestly. I don't see how this is any different from any of the previous opponents that Barry has fought on the regionals. Honestly, it's probably an even easier fight for Barry because, Mike Jackson coming off a real long layoff for one. And, the guy never really even looked good in the octagon. This is Mike Jackson, who basically got clubbed and subbed by a 24-year-old 0-0 debuting Mickey Gall at the time. Mike Jackson honestly just looks like some random dude at your gym. And, him, long layoff, 37 years old, against Dean Barry, who is, actually a fighter who's actually gotten some cage time in there. I think this is a Dean Barry all day, round one knockout. Minus 1,000, though, it's borderline unplayable at this point, but I just don't see how Mike Barry wins this. I don't know if he's making some crazy improvements during this time off, but the guy's never really looked that good. So, yeah, I think the UFC's just trying to feed Barry a win here. So, give me Dean Barry by round one knockout. And in the next fight, we have Marcin Prachnio versus Philipe Lins. And Prachnio is going to be the minus 155 favorite. Come back on Lins is plus 135. And we'll start with Prachnio. So with Prachnio, it looks like he is having a bit of a career resurgence. A lot of people, me included, had kind of written him off after 3 consecutive knockout losses. And he's riding a 2-fight win streak now with that Roundtree win, aging like fine wine. And so with Prachnio, he is more of a karate guy, hands down, point fighting style. And I'm not a big fan of his striking defense. He does leave his chin up when he does enter the pocket. And, the guy's definitely got some durability concerns. Obviously he was on that 3-fight knockout streak. And honestly, I have no idea how he survived Roundtree. Might have been a bit of an anomaly. And, overall, I just don't know if he's really just rediscovered his chin. But, I still can't really trust Prachnio. But talking about not trusting guys, we have Philipe Lins, who, I have no idea what happened with this guy, but he's just looked like an absolute shell of his former self. I don't know if it's the injuries or maybe it's just a lack of motivation after winning it all on PFL. Could be a mix of both, but, his UFC run has been just very lackluster. Just very low output, really just looking to counterpunch. And, he's out here getting out-volumed by Arlovski. And, I get it. Arlovski has been having a bit of a career resurgence himself, but, Arlovski's also beating guys like Chase Sherman, Carlos Felipe, and Jared Vandera. So someone like Lins, who, was a former PFL champ and, is coming off of a championship performance, really shouldn't be in the conversation with these guys. And him getting knocked out by Boser in his most recent fight, I'm definitely starting to question his durability and his heart as well. So, I think there's a lot of red flags when it comes to Lin's here. But taking a look at this matchup, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I do favor Prachnio here. Assuming Prachnio doesn't just get starched early, I think I trust him a little more to throw volume. I think he's going to be the quicker guy in there. Guys like Arlovsky and Boser, who is kind of a bloated up light heavyweight, was able to beat Lins to the punch. And I can definitely see Prachnio doing the same. Prachnio much more well-suited for light heavyweight. Whereas with Lins, it's been a while since he's cut back down to light heavyweight. And on top of that, I could definitely see Prachnio knocking him out also, especially if the chin of Lins is compromised. Lins has been knocked out a few times before, and him moving down to light heavyweight, the weight cut could potentially compromise his chin even more. And on top of that, Lins is coming off of a pretty long layoff. He's had a ton of fights canceled the past 2 years. And, I'm not sure what's going on there, if, he's just been in and out of camp or what, but I just can't see that being a good sign for him. So, yeah, a ton of red flags on the Lins side. Stylistically, I think that Prachnio could give Lins some trouble. I think he could definitely out-volume Lins. I think that maybe the movement of Prachnio could give Lins some trouble. Lins just very low output. He's just going to have to land a big shot on Prachnio to win, and that can definitely happen, especially with the striking defense of Prachnio and the fact that I do think his chin's still a bit of a liability. But, if he isn't able to land that knockout punch, I do think that Prachnio could potentially just volume him up to decision, or maybe just land a knockout shot of his own, because, prior to his, UFC debut, Prachnio is a finisher, and, he does actually have a finish over Ike Villanueva, who, he's a bit washed at this point in his career, but I do think that, Prachnio is still potentially a pretty dangerous fighter. So, as far as an official pick for this fight, I'd have to go with Prachnio here. I think he can get it done by decision. I think he can get it done by knockout. I don't know if I want to bet him at chalk, though, because at the end of the day, Prachnio, I think, is still a pretty unreliable fighter. Lots of question marks about him, too. So, yeah, while I like Prachnio here, I just don't know if I want to really lay the chalk on him. But the pick is going to be Prachnio, and I'll take him to win via decision. And in the next fight, we have Cameron Else versus Aoriqileng, and Aoriqileng's the -240 favorite comeback on Else is +200, and we'll start with the big favorite in Aoriqileng first. So Aoriqileng, a moderately well-rounded fighter, pretty good output and pace. He can mix in the wrestling as well, but I just don't think he's quite at that level yet. And he fought pretty competitively in both of his UFC losses against Jourdain and Molina, but at the end of the day, he did lose those fights. And with Molina, we don't really know what his ceiling's at, so it's hard to judge that fight. But we do clearly know that Jourdain is just barely a UFC caliber fighter, and Jourdain was able to kind of eke out a win against him. But I guess what really did him in those fights was the takedown defense. He did get repeatedly taken down and controlled in those fights. The cardio, his cardio was, he was slowing down in those fights, slowing down against Molina. And to an extent, Jourdain as well, too. And Jourdain's not like a guy with great cardio either. So a little worrisome there for Aoriqileng. And on top of that, Aoriqileng is, pretty hittable as well. So his overall game, I think, is pretty serviceable. But I do think there are enough holes in his game that, I don't really recommend laying the -200 on him. He's going up against Cameron Else, who, pretty limited footage from this guy. From what I have seen, though, he does like to start pretty aggressively, likes to just barrel forward and just throw big punches. Really not much else to say outside of that. A lot of his wins are, sub 1 minute wins. He's able to just completely blast these guys out, early in the fight. But, a lot of red flags in that regard, because these guys really low level and really just don't belong in there with him. A lot of 0-0 guys, 0-1 guys, he's able to get out of there. And, outside of that, it looks like he does kind of wilt a bit in fights, right? So, if things aren't really going his way after that first round, he's running into a bit of resistance. He has shown that he's got some quit in him. We saw in the Phillips fight, he basically just shelled up at the beginning of the second round there. Granted, Phillips is a really good fighter, but he just didn't really show a lot of willingness to want to continue in that fight, because I don't know if he was in, that much trouble, honestly. And, we saw in the Damo Whedon fight a little while back where, he was pouring it on early. Looked like it could have been a potential 10-8 round for him. But the fight goes into the second round, and we see Whedon start putting up a bit of resistance and start getting some of his offense going, and Else basically just quits in there. So the guy's heart is extremely questionable. The guy's definitely a front runner. So taking a look at this matchup, I got to favor Aoriqileng here. Just on the basis of him having gone 3 rounds. Aoriqileng also never been finished as well. So, maybe Else is able to nuke him in there. This fight is actually happening at 135. So Else might be the biggest hitter that Aoriqileng's fought. But with that said, the move up could potentially help the chin of Aoriqileng a bit, not having to cut that much weight. And it might also help his cardio as well. So I do think that in this fight, if he's able to survive that first round from Else, I do think that he might be able to pour it on enough to win in the second or third. But I just would not trust Else at -200 or Aoriqileng at -200. There's just, I think, way too many variables right now. On top of that, I just don't think that Aoriqileng is that good of a fighter. And, Else is dangerous enough early that I do think that he might be able to get the finish. So, the pick for me is Aoriqileng. I think he gets it done, round 2, knockout or submission. But I do think that Else could potentially give him some troubles early. However, this is probably going to be a stay-away fight for me in terms of the money line. I might look at some of the round props if they're juicy enough numbers, either Else round 1 or Aoriqileng round 2, round 3. But I'd have to get like a decent plus-size number. But outside of that, I don't know if I really want to touch this fight. But official pick is going to be Aoriqileng by round 2 knockout. And moving along, we have Tyson Pedro versus Ike Villanueva. And Pedro's the -450 favorite comeback on. Villanueva is +350. And we'll start with the big favorite in Pedro, who's going to be making his return to the UFC after a decently long layoff here. But with Pedro, he does have pretty quick, pretty heavy hands. I think the guy's definitely got power. He's hurting a lot of guys on the feet. Guys like, Paul Craig, OSP, and Shogun as well. Did lose a couple of those fights, but, he was able to drop them and put them in pretty bad spots. Overall, Pedro, he is 3-3 in the UFC, but, he still is very early in his career, and those were against UFC veterans and guys who are still with the promotion. So all UFC level guys. On top of that, Pedro, he's shown, a pretty well-rounded skill set as well. He's shown a pretty competent grappling game. But what I don't like from him is that, he does seem to have pretty poor striking defense. He is kind of hittable, and he has relied on his chin a little bit, right? He's taken a lot of damage in these fights. He hasn't been knocked out, but, we have seen him kind of rocked and wobbled a bit, and the chin's definitely been tested in a lot of these fights. And, the defensive grappling still is a bit spotty for him. But again, you have to consider it's against guys like Latifi and OSP and Hua, who are solid UFC veterans. And this was, pretty early in Pedro's career. Pedro's still a somewhat green fighter. And I know the expectations for him going into those fights were definitely a bit higher. But, in hindsight, the guy is, still very early in his career. And he's going to be going up against Villanueva, who is, primarily a boxer. The guy's very plotty, likes to move forward and just pressure opponents. But, by and large, I do think that Villanueva is a pretty one-dimensional fighter. He's just really looking to just wing big hooks in there and, just go wild, drop hammers. But, the guy can definitely crack, but I just don't know if that power has really translated at the UFC level. The guy's only got one win or one knockout win in the UFC, and, well, I guess one win. That was his only win, but it was against Vinicius Moreira, who is not a UFC level fighter, and the guy is super chinny as well. So he was more or less fighting a regional level opponent, which, he's been able to get guys like that out of there, but he hasn't really been able to beat anyone else at the UFC level. And on top of that, the guy is pretty hittable himself, and the durability just seems completely shot from him as well. He's been finished in all 4 of his UFC fights. He's been finished on the regionals as well. And right now, it just doesn't look like he's able to take much of a punch these days. But taking a look at this matchup, I think Pedro should be able to get him out of there. I think Pedro can knock him out. I think Pedro could potentially submit him as well. Club and sub situation, or just take him down and submit him. I don't think that Villanueva's got, fantastic ground game or anything. And the layoff, it could be an issue for Pedro, but I just don't think that Villanueva is a UFC caliber fighter. On top of that, his durability is shot. I think he can't take a punch anymore. And Pedro is someone who can crack pretty hard in there. Also, Pedro's the more well-rounded fighter. He's fought way better guys in the UFC, whereas Villanueva's losing to guys like Negumarianu, Marcin Prachnio, Chase Sherman, Jordan Wright, all, pretty bottom of the barrel guys, honestly. Whereas, Pedro, he's looked decent against UFC level fighters. He's dropped a number of these fights. But again, they're UFC veterans, very skilled fighters who are still with this promotion, whereas Villanueva is dropping these fights to guys who aren't really UFC caliber. And, some of these guys aren't even with the promotion anymore. So Pedro is the pick here, obviously. I think he gets it done with relative ease in there. Outside of, Villanueva landing just a big bomb against Pedro, I just don't see him being able to win this fight. And, I'm not even convinced that Villanueva's a massive knockout threat at the UFC level. And on top of that, Pedro does seem to have a crazy chin on him as well. So even if Villanueva is able to connect on something big, I don't know if he's getting Pedro out of there. So yeah, I got Pedro in the spot. I think he gets it done inside the distance. Likely by knockout. Villanueva's pretty chinny at this point. But I think he could submit him as well. Pedro, he has shown, some submission skills, and it could just be a club and sub scenario as well. So the pick is Pedro. Pedro inside the distance, likely in round 1, potentially early round 2 as well. But I like Pedro in the spot. And in the next fight, we have Sergey Khandozhko versus Dwight Grant, and it's a pick'em fight, minus 110 both ways. So we'll start with Grant, I guess the more tenured fighter here. So with Grant, he is a pretty straightforward fighter. He's mainly a striker. Pretty good power, pretty good accuracy, but of course the issue with him is he is extremely low volume. He does like to paw that lead hand out, but a lot of the time he's just backing up and just waiting for the counter. But yeah, with Grant, just a very low output guy. And you kind of see it, in his record, right? 4 of the 5 decisions he went to are split decisions. And regardless of how you scored those fights, I don't think any dispute that, he does fight very close, and the judges just don't really know quite what to do with this guy. And he is going to be going up against Khandozhko, who, if I'm being honest, I just don't have the greatest read on. He's been super inactive, and I haven't really been able to find a ton of recent footage outside of the UFC. But from what I have seen, it does look like he likes to fight on the outside, just kind of pick out opponents, land some counters. Does seem to have some power, likes to load up on some of the spinning attacks. And, I have seen him hit some takedowns before, but I don't know if that's a big part of his game, and I don't know if he's really all that proficient there. But what I don't like about him is that, I think his striking defense isn't really that good. He doesn't really move his head all that much. The chin is kind of shaky as well. I've seen him get dropped by a jab on the regionals, and he's getting hurt by guys like Rostam Akhman, who I don't think is UFC caliber. And I do believe Akhman actually took that first round off of Khandozhko. And in addition to that, I think his takedown defense and defensive grappling is a little shaky as well. But taking a look at this matchup, it is pretty tricky because Grant, he has very low output. And on top of that, we haven't really seen Khandozhko in over 2 years, so we don't really know how he's going to look. But assuming there isn't any crazy regression or improvements coming from him, I do think it should be a pretty close fight, which is weird, right? Because, pre-fight or pre-tape, I was potentially going to be on the Khandozhko side, looking at this line, pick him on both sides, potentially to fade Dwight Grant. Very low output guy. I thought I'd, jump on Khandozhko here. But, after doing tape, I'm not as confident anymore just because, rewatching a lot of Grant's fights, it's that, yeah, Grant is very low output, but, if you look at just the numbers, he's actually outstriking a lot of his opponents. So real quick, I'm just going to go over his UFC stats. So in his loss to Trinaldo, here are the numbers, 31-36 in favor of Trinaldo. So, very close fight there. Trinaldo definitely did win that. But, very close in terms of the striking numbers. And then in the Stefan Sekulic fight he arguably should have lost because he did give up a good amount of control time. But in terms of the striking numbers, 49-33 in favor of Grant. Before that, he gets knocked out by Daniel Rodriguez, but, he did have Rodriguez in a lot of trouble that fight, and D-Rod, is a really solid fighter, but numbers for that fight, 30-15 in favor of Grant, and then before that, he fought Alan Jouban, 38-24, striking numbers in favor of Grant again, and Jouban is a solid fighter as well. And then before that, he finishes Carlos Pedrosoli, numbers 20-17, and then in his fight against Zach Otto, 25-14, in favor of Grant once again, and then against Tyler Hill, 38-26 in favor of Grant. So, Yeah, he is low output, but he generally does a pretty good job of suppressing his opponent's output as well. Obviously, these numbers don't tell the full story. There's going to be a lot of nuance to it. But what I'm trying to say here is, Grant, he is actually a pretty dangerous striker. He does have a lot of power. He is very sharp in there. And, when guys fight him, I feel, they're not going to be as aggressive. They don't want to leave too many openings for him to potentially, hurt them or knock him out. So again, while Grant is, very low output, he is pretty good at, suppressing the output of his opponents. On top of that, Grant is actually, pretty good defensively. He does move pretty well in there. And, he is generally kind of elusive. So, the striking, I think, is actually going to be pretty interesting. But as far as a pure pick for this fight, reluctantly, I think I am actually going to go with Grant here. I do think it's going to be a very close fight. I'm not saying this with, very much conviction here. I do think that Grant can definitely land some of the bigger, bigger, more impactful shots. And, I don't think that Khandozhko is just going to volume him up on the feet here. Khandozhko might have some wrestling upside, but again, I just don't think he's a proficient enough grappler to have significant, control time in terms of the grappling. I don't think he's going to be submitting Grant either. Khandozhko at the end of the day is a striker. I do think that it's going to be a pretty close fight. It's going to be pretty damn contentious. So, I'm not going to die on a hill here for this fight, but I do think that, Grant should be able to land some of the bigger shots. Khandozhko, like I've said before, does have pretty bad striking defense. He's got a pretty shaky chin as well. So I do think that some big power shots from Grant could potentially swing the rounds. So I'm going to go with Grant in this spot. I think that if it goes to a decision, it is pretty 50-50, but I do think Grant's got some knockout upside. He has hurt some pretty good UFC fighters before, so I do think he could do that to Khandozhko. And at the end of the day, I really don't think Khandozhko's that good of a fighter. Not to mention, he's probably going to have a bit of ring rust coming in, 2.5 year long layoff. He could out-volume Grant. That's definitely in the cards here, but official pick for me is going to be Dwight Grant. I think he could potentially win a decision. I think he could get the knockout as well, so give me Grant. And in the next fight, we have Jourdain Wright versus Marc-André Barriault. And this is a short notice fight. Marc-André Barriault stepping in short notice for this one. Only one book, I think, has the lines out for this. But right now, it does look like Wright's the minus 160 favorite. Comeback on Barriault is plus 130. And we'll start with the favorite in Wright first. So with Jourdain Wright, he's always been a guy that I've kind of just been skeptical about. Pre-UFC, he's had a pretty soft schedule. His wins were over really low-level guys with, I think, just very, very shoddy records. And, even now, I still have my concerns about him. Still a little bit skeptical of him, especially past that first round. But as far as what he brings to the table, he is a karate guy, pretty light on his feet. Does seem to have quite a bit of power and, pretty good killer instinct in there. If he does have you hurt, he will go for the finish. And, I do believe all of his wins are inside the distance. Most of them, in that first round. I do think he's got one in the second round, but still, very early in that second round. So the guy, he is super dangerous early in the fight, but, definitely a ton of concerns outside of that. He does seem to have a pretty shaky chin, literal definition of a glass cannon in there. And he hasn't really had much success outside of that first round. And I would like to see a little more from him, but historically he does seem to be a round one knockout or bust sort of fighter. And, he's going to be going up against Marc-André Barriault, who is a pressure fighter, very good, pace and output. The guy does like to move forward and throw volume, pretty good boxer, is able to occasionally mix in the wrestling a little bit, but, by and large, the guy is just going to look to stand and strike in there. But, there are some concerns, him coming in short notice this fight. Also coming off of a knockout loss as well. His first knockout loss. I do remember going into that fight, the guy was touted as being a very tough guy, someone who's never been finished. And then he goes in there and gets knocked out early in that fight. So you do have to wonder how his chin's going to look coming into this fight, especially against a big hitter in Wright. And, how his confidence is going to be, right? Because that is a pretty nasty knockout to be coming back from. And, he is coming in short notice, so you do have to wonder how his conditioning is going to look. Historically, Barriault is someone who has been able to pick it up in fights. And, at short notice, I don't know how effective his style is going to be. But, taking a look at this matchup, I definitely do have to favor Wright in that first round. The guy, as I've been saying, is super dangerous. But, again, he does seem to fade, and he does seem to struggle against guys who've been able to pressure him. So I do think that stylistically, Barriault could pose a lot of issues. It's just the concerns, with Barriault coming in, short notice and all, and coming off of a knockout. You have to wonder a bit how that's really going to affect him. But, assuming, and this is a pretty big assumption, right, that, his chin's still intact and, his conditioning is okay. I do actually like Barriault in the spot. I do think that stylistically he may pose a lot of issues for Wright. I think his pressure style can definitely give Wright some troubles. And I do think that if he can weather that first round from Wright, that he might be able to take over later in the fight. Barriault, he's not a really big hitter, but he does seem to do a pretty good job of, doing attritional damage. And he is someone who generally builds into fights. So for those reasons, I definitely am leaning the Barriault side, especially at dog odds. Very interesting here. It seems the bookies maybe are expecting Barriault to not be up to form, or maybe not be able to perform like he usually does. Because I do think that, in a full camp, I do think that Barriault should be able to take this. Because historically, again, he has been pretty durable. Assuming Chidi didn't completely destroy his chin, I think that if Barriault is able to weather that early storm, he may be able to take over come that second and third round. So I'm going to go with Barriault in this spot here. I think he could get it done either round 2 or round 3 knockout. And I'll probably bet him small at underdog odds as well. But I'll probably also play the fight doesn't go, since Wright's fights I don't think have ever gone to a decision. And I do think that Wright either starches Barriault early, or we see Barriault take over and find the late finish. Wright is someone who kind of crumbles, under pressure, and especially if he, empties the gas tank early, I think that he's live to get finished late as well. So I'm going to go with Barriault in this spot. I'm going to go with Barriault round 3 knockout. And in the next fight, we have Louis Cosce versus Preston Parsons, and Cosce's the minus 175 favorite. Comeback on Parsons is plus 150. And we'll start with Cosce, the favorite here. He is a pretty straightforward fighter. He's very aggressive, has a ton of power. And pretty much in all the fights I've seen, he likes to start hot, just big winging power shots in there. And, he's got a ton of early finishes, lots of, sub 90 second wins. He's even got some wins under 10 seconds as well. But the thing to note about that is he is fighting some very low level guys. And in the one fight that he wasn't able to get the finish in the first round, he did gas pretty hard and did end up getting finished in the third round. However, I will say this about that fight, despite him pretty much unloading the tank in that first round, he still was able to survive till like halfway through the third round. So, maybe his cardio isn't that bad. Maybe it's just a pacing issue, but I have no idea. It could be a cardio thing because, his brother's got pretty bad cardio as well. So it could just be something that's in the family. But, I have no idea. But it is something that I'm kind of concerned about going into this fight, because he's going up against Preston Parsons, who is primarily a grappler. His striking isn't really that good, in my opinion. He's kind of stiff. Punches are a bit telegraphed. But, he is generally pretty aggressive with the wrestling and the grappling. Grappling, I should say. I don't think his wrestling is that good. All of his submission, or all of his wins are by submission. But I don't think he's some elite grappler or anything. I feel like in a lot of his fights, he's able to just out physical and out athlete a lot of guys. He's facing lower level guys as well. And, like I said before, I don't think his wrestling is particularly great. He's been able to just kind of peel guys to the ground, just out-muscle them in those situations. And, he's proficient on the ground, but, I don't know how good his cardio is, though. He's got a lot of early finishes as well. I don't think he's had a fight go into the third round. So, pretty interesting fight in that regards. We have one guy in Cosce who is a knockout machine, knocking out a lot of low-level guys early in fights against a grappler in Parsons, who's submitting lots of low-level guys early in the fight as well. So in terms of, how this fight's going to play out, I obviously do favor Cosce on the feet. He's, I think, just the much more dangerous striker, much harder hitter, and he does seem a lot more comfortable on the feet. Parsons does seem pretty hittable as well, and he has been finished a couple of times as well. However, those knockouts are against, UFC level fighters. One of them was against Mike Perry way back in the day, very early in Parsons' career. And it was against a Mike Perry who was on the come up and still had all of his brain cells. But most recently, he did get knocked out by Daniel Rodriguez. But again, Rodriguez a pretty good boxer, and that was a short notice fight as well. And Cosce, in my opinion, is definitely not on the level of these guys. He definitely has like the raw power, but I don't think he's quite as technical as these guys. So I guess my point is here, Parsons, his chin's been cracked. Cosce, big power, can definitely crack the chin of Parsons here. But, if Parsons is able to maybe weather that early storm, or if Parsons is able to get his wrestling and grappling going, I do think that he could take over this fight. Both guys I think have pretty questionable cardio. But, I do think that the gas tank of the gas tank of Cosce is going to go a bit quicker if they start grappling. And that's because I feel that, Parsons, he's going to be much more comfortable grappling. He's the one that's more used to grappling. So, if both guys, I think, have pretty crappy cardio, I think that the guy who's the one that, is the more proficient grappler is probably going to be the one who's, controlling the fight and probably, being a little more efficient with his energy. But again, Parsons doesn't seem to have like fantastic wrestling or anything, but he does seem to have a nice reactive double. And we did see Palatnikov, briefly take Cosce down. And I do think that if Parsons is able to get on top of Cosce, I do think that he could maintain top position, potentially even find the submission. So in this fight, I think I am actually going to go with the underdog in Parsons here. I think that, those first 5-7 minutes are going to be pretty rough for him, but I do think that he can make this a very grindy, very sloppy sort of fight if he does decide to initiate some of the wrestling and the grappling with Cosce. I think the earlier the better, honestly. Really look to drain the cardio of Cosce early, really start to take some of the heat off those shots. And I do think that, going, into that second and third round, if he's able to survive that first round onslaught, he should be able to start to take over. So I'm going to pick Parsons in this spot. I think he gets it done, either by decision or by submission. I think that he could get enough top time to ride out a decision here. And he could even find a submission because, Cosce, haven't really seen his grappling really tested yet. He's really just fought a bunch of bums, just blowing him out. And, against someone like Parsons who can grapple, I think he could give Cosce a lot of trouble on the ground. So give me Parsons in this spot. Give me Parsons by round 2 submission. And in the next fight, we have Charles Jourdain versus Lando Vannata. And this should be a pretty fun fight because we have two guys who, generally do prefer to strike. Two guys who have, pretty fan-friendly styles going at it. Jourdain is the -150 favorite. Comeback on Vannata is +130. And we'll start with Jourdain first. So, like I was saying, Jourdain does have a very fan-friendly style. He is a bit of an action fighter, someone who will like to move forward and just throw volume. He's very dynamic as well on the feet, does a great job of mixing up his strikes, and he does get a little wild in there sometimes. He will throw some jump knees and spinning attacks, but, overall, I do think that he's a pretty good offensive striker. He is someone who is willing to trade in the pocket as well, and he's definitely not afraid to get hit in there. And, by doing that, it does make his fights a little closer than they really need to be. It's really hard to pull away from a fight when, you're essentially taking one to give one. But, the guy is very tough, and he is someone who could push a pace in there. The big concerns that, I have with Jourdain, obviously, is that he is hittable, but also, his takedown defense isn't good. He's consistently taken down in his losses. Guys like, Laramie on the regionals, Green and Feely were able to take him down as well and have a lot of success there. And so that's just an issue that I have with Jourdain. And it's a great way to really neutralize his style as well. You kind of want to mitigate the output and the pressure of Jourdain, and by taking him down, you're able to do that. And, he's going to be going up against Vannata, who does have a very fan-friendly style as well. Vannata is primarily a striker, and I do think that Vannata is probably going to oblige him. Vannata does have, very unorthodox movement in there on the feet. He fights with his hands down. Very weird movement overall. And it can be hard for fighters to maybe get a read on him sometimes. And he does seem to have a bit of power as well, right? I mean, we see him hurt guys like Ferguson, Bobby Green, Matt Frivola. So, in my opinion, I think Vannata is just kind of a more refined Jourdain in a sense. I think Jourdain pushes a harder pace, throws more volume, but I do think that, they're cut from the same cloth essentially. Vannata, though, has shown a little more well-roundedness. I have seen him hit takedowns, get some control time, but by and large, the guy does prefer to strike. And, this should be a very fun fight, honestly. But as far as how it's going to play out, I can see a number of things happening. I do favor the striking of Vannata early. Vannata historically has had pretty strong starts, and Jourdain historically has had pretty, slow starts. I think he's actually dropped that first round at a pretty high clip in a lot of his UFC fights. I think in the Rosa fight, he dropped that first round. I think he got wobbled in that first round as well. Same with the Rojo fight. I don't think he got hurt in that fight, but I do think he dropped that first round. I think all the judges did score it in favor of Rojo. Same with Culibao. He dropped that first round. Culibao was able to knock him down as well. So Jourdain, he has shown that, he's prone to drop that first round. And, I'm not exactly sure why, but it is something I have noticed in a lot of his fights. But, Jourdain, he is someone who kind of builds into a fight. I wouldn't say he's, I may have misspoke when I say he starts slow. I definitely don't think he's like low volume or anything in that first round, but he has had a habit of, dropping that first round for some reason. He is someone who, he will throw volume in that first round. He's not like Petr Yan who, takes that first round to get his reads in. It's really weird, right? So, not a slow starter, but just someone who's dropped that first round, if that even makes sense. But, with Jourdain, he does continue to ramp it up as the fight progresses, and he does set a really crazy pace in there. So, that is something that Jourdain does well. He'll, really build into a fight, and we do see that he's got, a number of later round finishes also. With Jourdain, he does set a really crazy pace, and Vannata, what I have noticed is he does slow down. So, in a lot of Vannata's fights, on the flip side of things, he's, dropped a lot of third rounds as well. He's even been 10-8'd in a few of his third rounds. I can kind of see both guys or either guy's winning the decision here. I think that Vannata can win the first round. Jourdain's going to win the third round, and it'll just come down to that second round. I kind of do favor Jourdain because, he does build into a fight, and, if he finishes that second round strong, I could definitely see him winning on a lot of cards that way. And I do think that both guys are live for the knockout as well, especially if it's going to be a war. We're going to see both guys exchanging in there. I don't think that either of them has been knocked out. So, I do favor the decision a little bit more, but, both guys, do take a lot of damage. Both guys have been hurt before. So, just because they haven't been knocked out doesn't mean, it can't happen in this fight. But, if anyone's getting the knockout, I think I do favor Jourdain a little more than Vannata. Jourdain, a little younger, maybe a little more durable. We've seen some pretty crazy recoverability from Jourdain. And Jourdain, if he's able to get an attritional KO at the end of the fight, I do think that kind of favors him as well. But, as far as the other facets of the game, I kind of favor the wrestling of Vannata a little bit more. He's shown that, he can hit some takedowns in there. And, Jourdain does seem susceptible to being taken down. He does do a decent job of working his way back up, but, in a close fight, those takedowns definitely do score. But taking a look at this matchup here, I can definitely see why Vannata, has a bit of value, in a fight that is likely going to be a war, very back and forth, a little bit of wrestling upside, and also, a little more experience on the Vannata side. But, I think I got to go with Jourdain here. Historically, he has been, I think, pretty overvalued. He's usually coming in as a big favorite, and usually not very justified. But, in this case, I think the odds makers are starting to realize, his value here. The guy just gets into close fights, and, I think him being a slight favorite here is about right. I do think that, if it goes to a decision, I slightly favor Jourdain. I favor his pace and his output. And, if it does go, or if there is a knockout, I kind of favor Jourdain as well. But I can definitely see a finish from either side. And I could definitely see, Vannata pulling off a decision victory as well. But, I think that what it comes down to is just going to be the youth and the durability and the pace and the pressure that Jourdain is going to be able to put on. So I think Jourdain is going to win this. I think he can win via decision. I think he can win in the third round as well. As it stands now, I don't know if I'll bet it, just because, I don't really like to pay chalk on someone like Jourdain, who has historically, just fought very close. And, Vannata is, a decent veteran at this point with, pretty good striking and a somewhat well-rounded game. If I am looking to bet this, I might just take, Jourdain round 3. I think, if Vannata isn't able to keep up with the pace and the pressure of Jourdain, we likely see Jourdain be able to break him. But I can definitely see Vannata just get 10-8'd or something in that third round, like he has been in previous fights as well. So official pick for this fight is going to be Jourdain. Likely not going to bet it outside of maybe a round 3 prop or something. And in the next fight, we have Mudaerji versus Manel Kape, and very high-level striking affair in my opinion. The fight I'm actually the most interested to see. This one and the main event. I don't know if this is the co-main or not, but I feel like it should be because this is a pretty high-level fight. But Kape, he's going to be the minus 140 favorite, and Mudaerji is going to be the plus 120 underdog. And we'll start with the underdog in Mudaerji first. So with Mudaerji, he's a very, very sharp striker. Does look very relaxed, very composed in there. Super technical, and he does use his length pretty damn well as well. He's got good footwork, really good use of the front side kick to stay busy, and also to kind of keep his opponent at distance. The guy's got good counter punching as well. So overall, he's just shown a very good, solid offensive striking game. Now, some issues that I have seen with Mudaerji, it does look like, submission defense is still very shaky. All of his losses are via submission. His first level takedown defense does seem solid, does seem to have pretty good balance as well, does dig the underhooks well. But, he does seem to struggle once he is taken down. And, we haven't really seen him tested since his debut against Louis Smolka. And since then, he's really only fought strikers. And he's going to be going up against another striker in Manel Kape. And this is going to be a pretty big step up in competition. Kape is a very high-level guy, obviously coming in with a bit of hype and was the Risen champ at one point, knocking out Asakura, and went to a split decision with him in the first fight also. But since then, since joining the UFC, he's had a couple letdown performances, which, I'll touch on in just a second here. But with Kape, he is a legit striker. Very quick hands, good footwork, very technical, very explosive. He's very good defensively and does seem to have, pretty good vision in there. But of course, a big criticism of his is that he can be a bit low output at times. Kape, he is a bit more of a counter striker, but he's also someone who is, very technical, someone who likes to just sit back and make his reads and just capitalize on openings. And so sometimes if, those openings don't appear, it does lead to some of his fights being a little lower output. However, I do think that, the output concerns might be a little overblown. Really, I think it was really only bad in the Pantoja fight, right? But, that was a fight where I do give him a little bit of a pass on because, it was his UFC debut against a very good, very underrated fighter in Pantoja. And that was a fight where Pantoja was just standing in front of him. Didn't really give him any reads. Wasn't really, biting on any of his feints. Kind of just stonewalling him in there. And, Pantoja, he can afford to do that because the guy's just got an absolute granite chin. And he hits very hard as well. So, I think Kape wasn't able to really figure him out in his UFC debut. And Pantoja did a really good job of just staying busy as well. And not to mention, Kape, that was his first fight in the States, in the UFC. And, I think it was his first fight in a little while. He didn't have his shoes as well. So, I think all these things kind of added up to him having a very subpar performance. I do think that if they actually run it back, Kape would give, I think, a much better performance and it'd be a much more competitive fight. And also in regards to his low output, he is someone who historically does start kind of slow. I kind of equate it to being kind of similar to someone like Petr Yan, who likes to take that first round in to really get his reads in, get the timing down. And, definitely is a valid criticism of both guys, and it definitely has worked against them in certain fights as well. But I'd say more often than not, it's worked in their favor. But, if we take a look at Kape's fights so far, he did start pretty slow in 3 of the 4 fights. Obviously, the Pantoja fight we talked about already. The Nicolau fight, so he did drop that first round, largely due to, him getting taken down. But we did see him pick it up in that second round. He was really starting to let his hands go. Won that second round very clearly. And in my opinion, he won that third round as well. I don't know what some of these judges are seeing here, but, it was pretty close. But I do think he won that fight, and Nicolau is a very solid fighter. And then, of course, in the Osborne fight, he did start kind of slow in that fight, but he did eventually get the knockout. And that was not a fluky knockout whatsoever. He made his reads in that fight. He made the adjustment and hit a perfectly timed jump knee there, or flying knee there, to get the knockout. It wasn't just some random flying knee that he decided to hit in there, right? And I do feel that's a part of Kape's game that has been kind of underappreciated. Kape is actually very high level in his ability to make reads and adjustments in fight. So while I do believe, he does tend to have these slow starts, and lower output. It's undeniable, right? I'm not going to say that the guy's like an output machine or anything, but I do think that once he's able to get his reads and timing in, he is a very dangerous fighter, as we saw in his last 2 fights. So very high level, in my opinion, and I think that's what makes this fight, very, very interesting. I think on the feet, it could be a bit more of like a technical chess match in there. Both guys looking to feint their way in, making reads, seeing how the other reacts, and just setting traps in there. And honestly, I could see this potentially being a pretty low output affair. We usually see this when it comes to 2 very high level strikers. They're maybe a little hesitant to commit to anything, kind of similar to the Whitaker-Till fight in recent memory, where it wasn't a boring fight by any means, but it was one where we didn't see either guy really overcommit on anything. Neither guy wanted to get caught or slip up and potentially get knocked out there. So I can definitely see that happening in this fight as well. Obviously, a knockout can happen, right? But I do actually favor this fight to go the distance. I do think that if a knockout does happen, I kind of favor it on the Kape side a little bit more. But if it goes to decision, I kind of actually favor Mudaerji a little bit more, just because, the guy is definitely going to be throwing a little more volume. He's going to be a little more busy with the kicks. Mudaerji does a really good job of, filling the gaps of his striking with that front side kick that he likes to throw. That said, though, it's not to say Kape can't win a decision. I do think that Kape can have some big moments in rounds to swing it his way, because, with the kicks of Mudaerji, I don't know if they're too damaging. They're more of just like, feeler kicks. They will score some points, but, I kind of feel that judges, when it comes down to it, they kind of favor the big, like, headhunting shots more so than just a lot of the kicks that fighters throw. So in essence, if it goes to decision, I favor Mudaerji a little bit more, but not by like a crazy wide margin. I definitely think that Kape could win a decision as well. But if a knockout does happen, I actually favor Kape by a much more significant margin than Mudaerji. So ultimately for this fight, I'm going to go with Kape. I think he can either get it done by decision or by knockout, but I think he can potentially get the submission as well. I know Kape isn't really a submission guy, but overall, I do think he's a little more well-rounded. Something I do actually want to add on here is Kape, I believe he is actually a black belt, and he has actually shown that he could mix in the wrestling as well, whereas with Mudaerji, he is pretty much strictly a striker. So again, if this fight does go to a decision, I think Kape could just land some big shots and potentially hit some takedowns as well to score points. And lastly, what really swings it for me in Kape's favor is that he's just the much more proven, much more experienced fighter in there. Kape has proven that he's a high-level striker and mixed martial artist. Su, while he has looked good, you have to look at who he's looked good against. Who's his best win? Adeshev, Andrei Sukumtat, who, supposedly broke his hand in that first round. While, even before the UFC, Kape has been beating, very high-level guys. Asakura, obviously. Arguably, I'd say he won, both those fights. He beat the ghost of Mizugaki, but even those guys, I'd say are better wins than Adeshev and, these other guys that Mudaerji's beating. And, he's been in there with guys like Sasaki and Horiguchi. And this was like very early in his career too, when he was like, I think 22, 23 years old. So, even pre-UFC, the guy's been in there with much higher level fighters than anyone Mudaerji's ever fought. And then you throw in his resume at the UFC level. Obviously, Pantoja, top 5, top 3 guy, honestly. And then Nicolau, another proven ranked fighter who, he arguably won that fight. I think he won that fight. I think a lot of people thought he won that fight. And then obviously he's got finishes over guys like Ode Osbourne and Zalga Zumagulov. No slouches either, right? I think Osbourne's a better win than any of Mudaerji's wins. I'd say Zumagulov's a better win than any of Mudaerji's wins. Zumagulov, pretty solid regional fighter. Did join the UFC a little late, but he was able to finish Zumagulov. I think Zumagulov had only been finished once in his career, and that was early in his career. So honestly, a very underrated win in my opinion. Whereas Mudaerji, he's beating guys like Adeshev and Andrei Sukumtat and Malcolm Gordon. Very low level guys. Honestly, I'd say I'd say Kape would destroy these guys. He'd probably finish Adeshev, which Mudaerji wasn't able to do. So level of competition significantly in favor of Kape. And then I do think Kape is just the more well-rounded fighter also. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Kape just shoot some takedowns and potentially test the submission defense of Mudaerji, because all of Mudaerji's losses have been by submission. He's been submitted on the regionals by a bunch of no-name guys. Obviously, Smolka was able to submit him. And I know that Kape is not a proven submission guy, but he is supposedly a black belt. He has shown he could hit takedowns, so I wouldn't be surprised if he tested it a little bit here. But the guy's definitely going to be able to hang on the feet, and I do think if shit gets really bad for him, he could definitely just look to grapple a little bit. But I don't think he'll really need to. I think he should be able to keep it extremely competitive on the feet. So the pick here is going to be Kape for me. I'll probably bet him, at minus 140. I think that he's got a lot of upside here. But despite everything I have said about Kape here, I'm probably not going to go too big. And I do think that actually speaks a little more to how good I think Mudaerji could be here. I do think that Mudaerji could be very competitive with the striking. It's just that we're getting a bit of an unproven prospect in Mudaerji, whereas with Kape, we're getting a much more proven fighter. And so while I do think that Kape could win this, I do think that Mudaerji can make it very, very close. But, overall, though, I do favor Kape enough here. I think he gets it done by decision. So I'll probably bet him something small, nothing too crazy. I think he can get it done by knockout, by decision, possibly even submission if he's aggressive with it. But overall, I got to go with Kape. But yeah, really looking forward to this fight. Really interested to see how it plays out. And in the next fight, we have Maycee Barber versus Montana De La Rosa. And Barber's the minus 175 favorite come back on. De La Rosa is plus 150. And we'll start with the wrestler in De La Rosa, the underdog. So with De La Rosa, like I was just saying, she is a wrestler. Her boxing, she has made some improvements there, offensively at least. Defensively, I still think that she's still very hittable. And she definitely does not wear it well whatsoever. She's usually a bloody mess in most of her fights, and that's not good. Obviously, it's really bad in terms of the optics. Judges probably not going to favor the fighter that's all bloodied up. But that said, though, De La Rosa is a somewhat consistent wrestler in there. Only thing is, I would like to see her, be a little more aggressive with it sometimes. I'm mainly really looking at the Araujo fight where she was kind of one and done with the takedowns. She had a lot of them stuffed, and as soon as she had them stuffed, she was, kind of content to just sit back and strike with Araujo a bit, and she kind of just got beaten up in that fight. So I would like to have seen her chain together takedowns a little bit more, but Araujo has shown some really good takedown defense. But when De La Rosa is able to get the fight to the ground, she is pretty competent on top. She does seem to have, pretty decent submissions, pretty proficient top game. However, I'm just not really sure how effective she is there, because it does look like she really only does well against fighters with subpar defensive grappling. Taking a look at her wins, fighters like Rachel Hostovich, Nadia Kesem, Mara Romero Barella, Ariane Lipsky. So all fighters who not great in my opinion. But she is going up against Barber, who I don't really know if she falls into this category yet. We have seen Barber struggle a bit on the ground. Her takedown defense is okay. She is very strong, very physical in there, and she does seem to have decent balance. But from what I have seen, her bottom game just does not look that good. Obviously, Modaerji was able to rack up significant control time against her. Granted, she did get hurt that fight, but even in that first round, Modaerji was having success against Barber, so not a particularly great look. And of course, Grasso was able to take her back as well and put her in a couple submission attempts, put her in some tricky situations. And even in the Maverick fight, I think Maverick only shot one takedown, but in that one takedown that she did shoot, Maverick was able to take the back of Barber and close the round out with some control time as well. So not a very good look for Barber in terms of the defensive grappling. And against, I think, a committed wrestler and grappler, I think she could be put in some pretty bad situations. However, on the feet, I definitely have to favor Barber here. She's not the most technical fighter there, but she does have a pretty big power and physicality advantage. So, if any point she decides to just stop shadow boxing and actually throw down, she'll probably land some pretty big shots on De La Rosa. But She does have a habit of just sticking in the back and just throwing out feints, and not even coming close. But, if she's able to move forward, land some big shots, she could definitely bloody up De La Rosa like a lot of her previous opponents have been able to do. But on the flip side of things, I don't know how much De La Rosa is going to entertain the striking. She might look to strike a little bit, look to set up the takedowns, and, really work her grappling from there. Because, as I've said before, I do think Barber's defensive grappling is a bit deficient. And I do feel that if De La Rosa is able to aggressively pursue takedowns there, she could definitely pull off the upset. I think she could get enough top time to potentially win a decision, possibly even find the submission here. I mean, I don't know how likely that is, but we did see Barber get put in some, pretty tricky situations. And De La Rosa, I think, is a decent submission grappler. It's just that Barber is such a big physical fighter in there that she could probably just muscle her way out of a lot of these submissions. And that's the thing with Barber as well, right? It's just that she's got a pretty big, physical and athletic advantage against a lot of these fighters. She's able to kind of bully them. And, I feel like it's kind of carried her in a lot of her fights. She's able to kind of just bum rush opponents, hit them hard, and get them out of there. But I do feel that, as she's starting to fight more skilled fighters, she's starting to struggle a bit. Her game or her technique hasn't, quite caught up with the rest of, her athleticism, I guess. But, she is still pretty young. She's training at a decent camp. She could be making improvements. And, at the end of the day, she could definitely just come in here and out-athlete De La Rosa here, just stuff the takedowns, keep it standing, and do enough to win on the feet here. But for right now, I just got to go with the more skilled fighter, the fighter who I think is a little more well-rounded in De La Rosa. It's going to be a tough fight for her, definitely. Barber does hit very hard in there, and, she is very strong. She could definitely bully De La Rosa a bit in the clinch. But right now, I think I'm going to go with the wrestling of De La Rosa, pull off the upset here. I think she could win a very hairy decision. And again, maybe even pull off a sneaky submission here. But in any case, I got to go with De La Rosa, decent-sized underdog. So, give me De La Rosa in the spot. Give me De La Rosa by split decision. And in the next fight, we have Tanner Boser versus Alexander Romanov. And Romanov is the minus 500 favorite. Come back on Boser is plus 375. And we'll start with the big favorite in Romanov first. So with Romanov, he is a wrestler. He's very aggressive in there, very big power, very explosive with his takedowns. A lot of his fights, he's just picking guys up and just slamming them. And then when he is on top, he's very aggressive with the ground and pound. He's literally just dropping hammers on them from top. But, the issue that I've kind of had with Romanov is, I'm not saying he's not skilled, but it does look like he's able to out-athlete a lot of guys in there. He's usually just the much bigger, stronger guy, and he's able to pick him up and just bully them in there. And we did see the one time he wasn't able to do that against, a skilled opponent in Espino. He started to slow down in there. He had a lot less success, right? Because you look at his fight against Espino, and you look at his fights against all these other guys, he's pretty much dominating them, but against Espino he looked like a much more limited fighter, and I feel he was really fortunate to be able to come away with a win in that fight. Took that nut shot and decided he didn't want to continue anymore. Ended up getting the technical split decision there, but it was a very close fight. And Espino is a good fighter, but Espino is also like 40 years old as well. So with Romanov, I do feel he's got some potential in the division. The guy's just a very strong, very raw athlete in there. But I would like to see him polish up his game a little more, especially as he starts to take that step up in competition. And, this is, I think, going to be a step up in competition for him in Boser. Boser, I think, is going to be the best striker that he's fought to date. And Boser, he is a pretty nimble, pretty agile heavyweight in there. I do think the guy's a little more well-suited for light heavyweight. He'd be a very big light heavyweight, but I do think he's got a more of a light heavyweight frame. But, Boser, he does have good footwork. He's got good, pace and pressure, good striking. I've been pretty back and forth with him in terms of the power. I've always thought of him as a bit more of a decisionator. I wasn't sure how much of his power had translated to the heavyweight division, but, he is on like a 3-fight knockout streak in terms of, his wins. But, you look at the wins or the knockouts he's getting, it's against OSP, who is, a light heavyweight, chin's potentially cracked. might be a little washed at this stage in his career as well. And his other knockout wins are against Pessoa and Lins. Pessoa's a total bum. The guy's also been finishing all of his losses also. Lins, not too sure. Lins might potentially be washed, but yeah, very weird, right? So the guy does seem to have a bit of power, but I don't know if he's got like crazy concussive power. And Romanov, I think, should be durable enough, young enough in his career to be able to withstand some of these shots. But, of course, the big issue with Boser is that, his ground game is pretty non-existent. His takedown defense is okay, but, if you're able to take him down, get him on his back, he does seem pretty lost there. The guy obviously did lose to Latifi, right? I know a lot of people disagree with the decision, but, Latifi, who is a light heavyweight, was able to take him down and lay on top of him for a good chunk of 2 rounds. So, if Latifi, a light heavyweight, again, is able to do that, then Romanov, who is a legit heavyweight, should be able to take him down and just smash him from top, right? So, this does kind of seem like a bit of a layup fight for Romanov stylistically. But some things to consider are that, Latifi, he is a very accredited wrestler, a very experienced wrestler. And Romanov, still a bit unproven. He's more or less just been dominating these lower level guys. And, against Boser, maybe he is able to take him down and just smash him. But, he's going to have to get the fight down there first. And, Boser, he is pretty elusive. He's got pretty good footwork. And that first level takedown defense, is decent from Boser. So if he is able to keep it standing, I can definitely see him give Romanov some troubles on the feet. Because Romanov, his stand-up is still very clunky in there. He still doesn't really seem all that comfortable in the stand-up. We saw Marcos Rogério de Lima, kind of give him a little trouble on the feet for however long that was. We saw those leg kicks get the attention of Romanov. So Romanov, in my opinion, is still a little lost on the feet. And he is going to be going up against Boser, who is by far the best striker he's fought to date. However, I don't know if it's going to matter too much because at the end of the day, I do think that Romanov is going to be able to hit the takedowns. I think he's going to be able to get top control time and likely just do a lot of damage on top. Now, I guess the big question is if Romanov is going to be able to get the finish. Because, Romanov, he has been very aggressive against these low-level guys, but while Boser, he can be pretty bad off his back. He can get stuck there. I don't think he's just going to shell up in there, though. And I do think he's going to be looking to defend and, trying to stay alive in there. So I don't know if Romanov is going to get the finish. Romanov still, I think, is very unpolished with the ground and pound. There's not a lot of process. He's just looking to posture up sometimes and just pound their face in without, he's not looking for a submission. He's not looking to really advance position. He's kind of just on top, just brute forcing his way to a finish a lot of the time. And, you could do it against these low level guys, but, against guys who are, a little more well-versed in there, guys who are a little more, defensively sound in there, it's going to be harder to be able to get that finish. So, yeah, I think that Boser might be able to survive on the ground against Romanov. And I guess that's going to be my hot take for this fight. I think Romanov wins via decision. I think the expectation is that he just takes Boser down and smashes him, which is why the line is lined the way it is. But, I think Boser, he's probably aware of this narrative as well. And I can definitely see Boser just being a bit stubborn in there. So I think Romanov likely gets it done by decision. If it's a nice enough plus number, I might bet that instead of just the money line here, because at the end of the day, I just don't know if I quite trust Romanov enough quite yet. On paper, this is a very good stylistic matchup for him. Does seem like a bit of a layup fight, honestly. But, I just can't trust Romanov because he's more or less just run through guys, pretty much had it his way. And the one time he didn't, he kind of just won it out. So I can't trust a fighter like that just yet. He's going to have to redeem himself before I'm going to lay minus 500 on him. But the pick is going to be Romanov. I think he gets it done via decision. And in the next fight, we have Claudio Puelles versus Clay Guida. And Guida is the minus 140 favorite comeback on. Puelles is plus 120. And we'll start with the underdog in Puelles first. So with Puelles, the best way I could really just describe this guy is he's just a very sticky grappler. And what I mean by that is generally he just likes to get his hands on you, rip you to the floor, and just kind of hang off you, make it a very grindy, sloppy, sticky sort of fight on the ground. And, if a submission presents itself, he is going to latch onto it. And the reason for that is because the guy's stand-up is really just not any good. He's very uncomfortable on the feet from what I have seen. He's kind of slow. He's very hittable in there. But, like I said before, he's going to look to pursue the grappling pretty aggressively. A lot of his fights do take place, in control positions, which is actually very interesting to me because I actually don't think the guy's wrestling is that great. I do think that his entries are a little sloppy and telegraphed. And it's just that he hasn't really fought anyone that's really been able to punish him lately for it. You look at the guys he's gone up against, guys like Marcos Mariano, Jordan Levitt, Gritzmacher, not very threatening fighters on the feet and not guys with great defensive grappling. And then in his other fights, he was more or less just getting pieced up on the feet by guys like Silva and Bravo, who are, decent strikers. And those guys were able to keep the fight standing and just piece him up on the feet. Obviously, Silva was absolutely doing work against Puelles, but kind of choked that fight away and ended up getting knee barred. But he was on his way to just beating the absolute shit out of Puelles in that fight. And I do think that going forward, Puelles is going to run into guys who are going to be able to stuff his takedowns, keep it off the ground, and just be able to do work on him against the feet, or on the feet, I should say. But so far, he's gotten pretty favorable matchups against guys who haven't really been able to stuff his takedowns. And this is going to be an interesting matchup here with Clay Guida. I almost said Jim Miller. Because, Guida, he is a wrestler by trade, but, he has been taken down. He has struggled on the ground. And Guida is someone who has kind of fallen in love with the hands a little bit. We don't really see him wrestle too much these days. He does mix it in occasionally, but, he does prefer to just look to stand and strike in there. He's got lots of movement on the feet, lots of volume, a lot of output, but not a ton of power behind it. Guida, he does seem to have very good cardio, and it is something that he can keep up for multiple rounds. And, once in a while he will mix in the takedowns, but, generally lately he's been looking to just box in there. And historically, Guida has kind of struggled with the submissions a bit. He's got a number of losses, by submission, mainly by that guillotine choke, right? We look back on his record. His most recent submission was against Jim Miller. Got hit with the guillotine very early in that fight. But Jim Miller, he's a very live submission threat early, right? The guy's known for hitting those round one submissions. And then before that, Charles Oliveira, another guillotine choke in that first round. But, Oliveira is a high-level submission guy and the current champ, obviously. And then before that, it was to Thiago Tavares, a submission guy, a veteran. But, this is way back in the day now. This is like 2015, so I'm not sure if that's a part of Guida's game that's been patched up, but, he has shown that he could definitely get caught in some submissions. And that definitely is a bit of a concern going into this fight because, Puelles is a grappler by trade, and, if Puelles is going to fight like he usually does, this fight is probably going to hit the ground. There's going to be some grappling going on in this fight. There's going to be some transitions. And what we have seen from Puelles is, he can be pretty aggressive with it, and he's not going to give up on it, right? Because he does have a number of submissions late in fights. So, he's going to keep looking for that submission attempt. And, Guida, he's going to have to be very, very careful here. But Puelles, he is going to have to get the fight to the ground first. And, Jim Miller does seem to have pretty decent takedown defense. And, you look at the guys who are submitting him, they're pretty damn good submission artists. I just don't know if Puelles is quite at that level yet. He could be. He's definitely very persistent with his grappling, but I don't know if he's quite at that level just yet. And on the feet, I definitely favor Clay Guida, even though he's much older in there. He is very reliable to throw volume, and he's just the much more technical and just much more comfortable boxer in there against someone like Puelles. So, on the feet, I do favor Guida. And so if Guida is able to keep it standing, I do think that he can likely just out-volume his way to a decision here. And even at 40 years old, I think Guida should have good enough cardio to be able to keep up with the grappling pace that Puelles is likely going to be able to put on him. Guida has shown he could still put on a pretty good work rate in there. And, he has shown he could still go to the wrestling in these fights as well. And, he is coming off of a crazy comeback win where he showed, really good conditioning, really good durability also. So, I do think that, he's going to be able to likely work his way back up to the feet if he gets taken down here. I think his takedown defense should be good enough for him to stuff a number of takedowns also. And I think that on the feet, I kind of favor Guida to be able to just do a little more work. And I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any means. Guida is not some, high-level striker in there, but he is someone who, is going to look to stay busy. And I do think that, if he's able to keep this fight standing, work his way back up when he does get taken down, he should be able to win a fairly competitive decision here. So I'm going to go with Clay Guida in this spot. I'm going to go with the veteran. I think he's going to be able to do enough work on the feet to win a decision here. So give me Clay Guida and give me Clay Guida by decision. And in the main event, we have Jessica Andrade versus Amanda Lemos. And Andrade is the minus 175 favorite. Comeback on Lemos is plus 150. And we'll start with the underdog in Lemos first. So with Lemos, she is a very strong, very heavy-handed Muay Thai striker. Very technical in there, very heavy-handed, obviously, like I just said. And a lot of people have nicknamed her the female Figueiredo. And I do think it's kind of justifiable. They have a very similar style. They like to stalk their opponents, back them down, and just land very heavy shots in there. And, visually, they just have a very similar style as well. And with Lemos, she does hit very hard for the division. Obviously, 2 knockouts in the UFC already. And I think she has been able to get knockdowns in all of her wins, I believe, as well. So, very big power. But, of course, the issue with, big power comes, just slightly subpar cardio, right? Because, if you're throwing that heavy most of the time, you are going to slow down in fights. And we have seen her slow down in fights as well, right? Her fight with Hill, she was slowing down, did drop that 3rd round. And even against Inoue, she was starting to slow down a bit as well. And, this being a 5-rounder, I think is a little worrisome for Lemos because, if you're starting to slow down in that 3rd round, you do have to wonder how she's going to look, come those championship rounds. And Andrade, on the other hand, she has been in 5-rounders. I believe she's gone the distance in one of those 5-rounders. But in the other ones, she's either been finished or has gotten a finish in those fights. But, with that said, though, Andrade definitely has got more, 5-round experience and just more training time in for 5-rounders, right? And the thing with Andrade is she does hit very hard as well. Andrade is someone who is, very physical, very athletic. And overall, she does have a pretty well-rounded game. But, I have felt that she's always just been a bit more of a brute force sort of fighter. I'm not saying she's not technical in there, but she has been able to just bully a lot of opponents in there. Definitely not to say she's bad or anything. She's actually, I think, a pretty good, well-rounded fighter. Good striking, good wrestling, good jiu-jitsu. And she does seem to do a pretty good job of, leverage her physicality and athleticism with her skill set. But on the feet, she is someone that used to be pretty plotty, just move forward and just chuck bombs at opponents. And, even with like the wrestling and the grappling and stuff, she's able to just pick opponents up and slam them. So, the physicality is a big part of her game. And she has done well so far, but I feel like it can only really get you so far because once you get to a certain level, like we saw in her fights against Rosa and Joanna, against far more technical strikers, they're able to kind of just matador her a little bit in there. They're able to use that footwork and just pick her apart at distance. And then, of course, we saw in the Weili fight, she kind of got out physicaled there. So we are seeing where the ceiling is for Andrade in terms of, how far that athleticism and power is going to take her. She's going to have to start, rounding out the rest of her game, really let the technique catch up if she wants to, become a championship fighter once again. Obviously, she did hold the belt at one point, but, it was from a slam, and I don't think that's a very replicable outcome. So for her to have, I think, sustained success, she's going to have to make some more improvements to her game. And, the interesting thing is I do think that Andrade is starting to improve her game overall some more. We're starting to see some evolution there. Obviously, in the rematch with Rose, we saw a lot more head movement coming from her. She did a much more job of, just feinting and being a little less predictable. She did ultimately come up short in that fight, but, she did show improvements in that fight. She showed that she was willing to adapt, because prior to that fight, a lot of people had kind of written her off in that second fight, me included. We all thought that Rose is going to be able to just, pick her apart and do basically what she was doing in that first fight, minus the slam, of course. But, Andrade actually kept it, very competitive, and she was landing some very big shots on Rose, did end up taking that final round also. A lot of people are saying, if that fight did get extended, if it was a championship fight, we probably see Andrade win that. And, I can't say I disagree, but, something I will say is it did look like, Rose was starting to, pour it on. Not pour it on, but it looked like Rose did start a little stronger early than she normally does in championship fight. So, if it was a championship fight, it probably would have played out much differently. We'd see much different pacing in that fight. But ultimately, what I'm trying to say here is it is good to see these improvements come from Andrade. Andrade is a really young fighter. And, we talk about young fighters, potentially making improvements fight to fight. But we're actually seeing it here with Andrade, and Andrade only being 30. I think we're starting to see maybe her put it all together, her entering her physical prime. On top of that, she's just a very well-experienced fighter at this stage in her career as well. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think it's a pretty fun fight. Obviously, I think the knockout is potentially live for both fighters. You don't see this too much in women's MMA, but I do think both girls have knockout power here. Obviously, Lemos, I think, has very big power, very, very good technique in there. Andrade, I still think is a bit hittable. So I do think that Lemos could potentially land a big shot on Andrade and put her out. We have seen Andrade finish before. So, Andrade, while, historically she does seem pretty durable, she is someone who can get finished. And of course, I do think that Andrade could get the finish on Lemos as well, because, like I've said before, Andrade is very explosive and is a big hitter. On top of that, we have seen Lemos finished as well. Granted, it was up 2 weight classes in her UFC debut, but regardless, a finish is a finish, and Andrade is a very big hitter. So I think the knockout is live for both fighters. But in terms of the stand-up, I think I do actually favor Lemos a little bit more. I think she's just the more technical fighter in there. But outside of that, I kind of favor Andrade. Everywhere else, Andrade does appear to be a bit more well-rounded. I've seen Andrade look to just wrestle and grapple in there. And, I do favor Andrade as the fight gets extended. Also, I don't think she's got like a massive cardio advantage. I do think that, Andrade, she was slowing down in these fights that she gets extended in. But I think for this matchup specifically, she should be the one with better cardio. So for all of those reasons, I got to favor Andrade here. On top of that, she's just a proven high-level fighter, right? Recently her only losses are against just elite championship-level fighters. She does have a number of losses earlier in her career against fighters like Pennington and Marion Renault and Liz Carmouche. But, you do have to consider this was pretty early in her career. She was still, I think, a somewhat green fighter. Not to mention, this was at 135. So, she's losing to these, UFC level fighters up 2 weight classes. So, I do give her a lot of slack there. And then, in her recent losses, she's losing to fighters like Joanna, Zhang Weili, Rose Namajunas, and then Shevchenko. So, very, very high caliber fighters she's losing to lately. And then, of course, on the other side of things, we have Lemos, who, she's gotten some flashy knockouts, in the UFC. She's looked really good. But it's against, lower level fighters, fighters like Lavinia Souza, fighters like Montserrat Ruiz. And, the Hill fight, the Angela Hill fight was supposed to be a big step up in competition for her, compared to those other fighters. And she barely passed that test, in my opinion. And now she's taken another, decent step up in competition, from Hill to Andrade. So I got to go with Andrade in this spot here. I think Andrade is just the more well-rounded fighter. She's younger as well. She's fought just much better competition in there, way more experienced also. So, I think by the numbers and everything, tail of the tape and everything, she's, got a big advantage over Lemos. But, of course, styles do make fights, and I do think that stylistically Lemos can give Andrade a lot of trouble on the feet. But, I don't think Andrade is just going to look to stand and strike with Lemos for 5 rounds. I think that we see Andrade look to mix in the wrestling and the grappling here, potentially even, cage push a little bit, because, we did see a much smaller fighter in Inoue have a lot of success holding Lemos up against the cage. So I can definitely see Andrade doing the same. So yeah, I think if Andrade is able to make this a mixed martial arts fight, she can have a lot of success. Not to mention, I do favor Andrade over the course of 5 rounds as well. And overall, I just feel that the paths to victory here for Andrade are a little wider than Lemos's, right? So, if it goes to decision, I do favor Andrade a little bit more, because for Lemos to win a decision here, she's probably going to have to outstrike Andrade for 3 rounds, which, I don't really see happening. I think she can for maybe 2 rounds. That 3rd round could get a little dicey for her. she could potentially get the finish, but I do think that a lot of her finish is going to be tied up in those first 2 rounds, when she's fresh. I do think that, as the fight gets extended, Lemos isn't going to be able to get, or the finish isn't going to come as easily for her. And, the finish, I think, is live for Andrade as well, right? Because Andrade can definitely just knock Lemos out also. So, I just think that when it comes to the decision, when it comes to the knockout, I think I got to favor Andrade a little bit more in both of those spots. All of those things on top of the fact that I just think that Andrade, a little more proven, a little more experienced, a little more well-rounded. I think this fight should be hers. So I got to go with Andrade here. I think she probably gets it done by decision. I don't think she's going to finish Lemos. I think it's going to be a pretty gutsy fight. I think we're going to see both of them slow down a bit, as the fight progresses, especially if grappling is involved. But I got to favor Andrade here. So the pick for me is going to be Andrade. I got Andrade winning via decision.